Hello, everybody, and welcome to our March Tile Network seminar. In today's talk, we have three university teachers slash senior university teachers from the University of Sheffield here with us. It's Kate Campbell-Pilling, Gareth Bramley, and Gordon Cooper. And they are all learning and teaching focused, and it's an interdisciplinary group that is looking to share their own practice on sharing audio feedback and best practice in sharing audio feedback. So I'm going to hand over to, I believe, Kate. I'm going to share myself here. I'm going to hand over to Kate to take it away.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Carolina. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. This afternoon, we're going to talk about audio feedback. So our session is called Closing the Feedback Loop. And what we're going to talk about is sharing audio and video feedback and talking about that in relation to good practice and sharing some of our experiences in the hope that we can start a discussion. And perhaps many of you out there have been doing audio feedback or thinking about audio or video feedback. So we're quite keen to hear your insights and to have a collaborative discussion. So I'm Kate Campbell-Pilling and I work with Gareth Bramley in the School of Law at the University of Sheffield. Gareth and I have worked together for a long time, and in the last few years have started working with Gordon, who is in the School of Biosciences, and we're all passionate about supporting students to excel and finding the right way to do that. So Gareth and I are going to talk first about our experiences and our reflections on using audio feedback, and then Gordon is going to talk about his in the context of his work in the School of Biosciences. So Gareth and I are going to talk about reflections on the justification for using audio feedback practice, and we've got a couple of links there. We have written some blog posts on this topic, and if you want to have a look at those after today, you're very welcome to read and explore some of our thoughts a little bit more. To put this into some context, we all know that giving feedback takes a long time and can be very involved and time-consuming and has an emotional as well as a academic element to it in terms of thinking about the feedback that you're creating. So we've got cognitive and emotional effort, and nothing is going to change the time commitment that is required. But giving that and putting that effort into it, you want it to be worthwhile and for the students to receive it and use it as you imagine they will. And we've all had students, I would imagine, come to see us who are so focused on the mark, and then you have a conversation and they haven't looked at the feedback or they haven't read the feedback, or I've occasionally had a student who didn't know the feedback was even there. So it's incredibly frustrating. And students have got to be ready to receive the feedback. They've got to be able to know what to do with it and to be open and receptive to it. And we think that's on different levels. So we think that they need to be emotionally receptive to receive that feedback. So they need to be able to open themselves up to the feedback in a meaningful way. Feedback, well done feedback, should be reflective, should encourage the student to reflect on their own work, but also help them to identify areas to improve, to move forward, so that it's not only, and I know it's a bit sort of a cliche, but not only feed back, looking backwards, but feed forward to help them going forwards and to help them improve. So they have to be ready to use that feedback in that way, and moves on to the second point, know how to use their feedback properly. So it's not just a case of reading it through, filing it and moving on. They need to understand the depth of the feedback and the value of the feedback to inform and improve their further work. So when students aren't ready to receive that feedback and when they don't know how to implement and use that feedback properly, a lot of students will just read it, put it away, and it isn't seen as being useful and the value that we think that we are giving by doing that. So overall, we think it's, when you put it like that, a really frustrating picture. So we thought, what could we do to try to address this and to try to make it the tool that we're trying to make it be from the academic side, and also the tool that it should be and understood to be from the student side. So we were mindful of students in the current world. So students devote increasing attention to multimedia, and we've all seen and perhaps have family members who spend a lot of time on their phone. It's very much a look, identify something really quickly and then move on. There's got to be something that kind of grabs the attention, and pure text can be difficult for such screen users. So written text in that traditional feedback format of it just being purely written text can be difficult for some students to access, to find appealing and to engage with. The way students access materials, they now want it to be much more flexible, so they'd like to be able to access it anywhere and to navigate it in a way that they're more familiar with based on their screen usage. So pausing it, skipping, altering the playback rate, and all of that doesn't sit well with that pure text feedback that we're perhaps so traditionally used to using. We also thought about how audio feedback or video feedback could alter and add to the dynamic of pure text feedback. So when we speak, we're able to convey so much more than we do when we write. And when I'm typing the feedback, I'm certainly saying it in a certain way in my head, but I'm not always sure that the students are hearing that when they're reading it back. And certainly Gareth and I had a lot of students who would book in to see us to go through the feedback, the written feedback, and it was often a case of really us just sort of reading out our comments, which the students would then say, oh, that's really helpful, thank you very much. And I think, but I've only read out what I've written, but perhaps the way I'm reading it out actually makes a big difference to the students and helps their understanding and makes them more receptive to it because they can see the way in which it's been intended to be understood. So when you are speaking, intonation and pace can really change and alter the feedback and help students better understand our intentions and also emotionally engage with that feedback. It can be more inclusive, it can be more friendly, it can be more encouraging, which is, I'm sure, how most of us are writing it, but it isn't being received that way by students. So I'm going to pass over to Gareth to talk about the methods of how he and I approached it.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so as Kate set out, we've been doing this for quite a while now. So we're going through different iterations, and as Gordon will talk a little bit more about, there's kind of new technologies all the time or new ways that we can interact with this. I think we've gone from a stage of probably 10 years ago, even recording feedback into a dictaphone, or perhaps even using the grade mark tool in the first iterations of audio feedback, through to what we now use, which is a Kaltura Media. So that's the University of Sheffield software of choice that we are encouraged to use because, well, not only does it keep an analytical record of the recording, but it also provides a transcript, which again, Gordon will allude to, and it's also easily kind of downloaded to our PCs, and we have had assurances that it's going to be there for some time to come, and there are records for it. So that's the media we choose to use. It may be different at your institutions. You may have different ways of doing things. I do think if you have an option other than the grade mark tool, it's probably preferable, particularly because there are issues with both sound quality and it not providing a transcript, and perhaps there's some issues there with how long that will remain in existence, depending on how long the student wants to use it for, of course, because it depends on the length of your course. But in terms of what we specifically did, Kate and I differed a little bit, and I think there's no one way to do this other than probably we would say don't record for too long. It might depend a little bit on the length of the submission that you've got, but certainly if you're marking something that's of essay or problem question basis, which is what we're doing a lot in law, and it's around 2,000 to 3,000 words, I don't think we'd recommend more than 10 minutes of feedback. We probably both say. I think that's quite a lot of feedback. You can say quite a lot in that time, and obviously there's the ability to speed it up, to skip between, as Kate was saying. So we think we're comfortable with that. But if you're starting to get into a situation where you're recording 30 minutes or longer, I don't think that's going to work, and I don't think the student will engage with it. Now, there is potentially the option of recording your conversation, kind of marking it, providing feedback in real time, and recording that whole piece, which we've encountered in the past from a couple of others. And I know Gordon might talk a little bit more about his differences in terms of what he's done. But we would both kind of use Kaltura, and we would either fully mark it in my case, or pre-mark kind of sections, and then usually add kind of specific comments through Turnitin, because predominantly our assessments are now in law on Turnitin. I think that's probably true of most of HE now. The amount of in-person written exams we actually have is extremely rare now. And the other thing to say is that we've really only encountered this in relation to formative work. So certainly all our formative work is done uploaded via Turnitin, and then we will open the script, use Kaltura to capture our screen. We can either have our face or not, or just our voice, and then scroll through the script, kind of referring to the particular bubble comments or the particular parts of our general feedback that we want to kind of articulate. And that will usually be done according to some sort of structure. We do have rules now in the School of Law at Sheffield and across, I think, schools about the structure of general comments, and we'll try and stick to that in a kind of feedback sandwich method. So start with something positive, then look at kind of constructive comments for improvement, and then like feed forward remarks is how we would probably take our approach, and try and stick to a round of between 5 and 10 minutes per student. So yeah, I think that's that slide, Kate. If you want. So in terms of one thing we'll just quickly say, I know Kate has talked about this briefly, but there's a lot more you can do, obviously a lot more you can say, and these are some analytics that someone we used to work with a few years ago kind of put together, who was working out at Edge Hill, and there's just so much more you can say through those audio comments. The challenge for me increasingly with written comments is it becomes very formulaic. Like, as I said, we now have a policy at the University of Sheffield where there's a particular format we have to do. We have to hit certain things and put certain subheadings in our generic comments, and we also have to add specific comments to the script and use those kind of either quick marks or bespoke comments, and that can be quite tiring and difficult, where we're finding that we've got increasing number of students. I know obviously you might have seen our stats before, some of our work has come from smaller cohorts, and the same with Gordon, and that's something to debate later on. But increasingly where we're getting large numbers of students to mark and we're giving this traditional written feedback, it can be very time consuming, very difficult to do, and frankly quite dull. And I think that kind of can come across, sometimes the more that you do, the more difficult it is to remain positive in those words, as Kate was alluding to before. Even if you think you're writing in a positive, constructive way, that might not necessarily come across like that. And we found you do have to bring your energy up when you're providing this audio feedback, but it kind of prompts you to do that. You think, right, okay, I'm going to look at this script, I'm going to visualize that student, and if it's formative work, I'll see the name and I'll say their name as a starting point, and I'll have in my mind I'm going to start with a positive, particularly if the mark is not something they expected, because our formatives are graded. More often than not, they will see that mark. And the other thing to say about this is that you see a mark you're not happy with, you're very likely to read all the remaining comments in a negative way, and that can really harm and perpetuate that kind of, just kind of dissociation with the script and not seeing feedback as a kind of feed forward. So yeah, in a nutshell, there's a lot more you can do and a lot more you can say with audio. Yeah, in terms of perceptions, in all the time that Kate and I have been doing this, I don't think we've seen really many negative comments. They're nearly always positive. This is reflected in the literature. I think that's why we started it, really, is that we started reading these early pieces, say 10 years ago, on people using audio feedback. There's been a lot of literature since. We've got some references at the end where it's just positive. The only, not even a negative comment that students tend to say is, we're sorry it took you so much time and effort to do this, which is really interesting, because I don't know what they're thinking we're doing in relation to written feedback. They obviously think we put no effort at all into that. I'm actually like, well, do you realize how much time it took us to do these written comments? So yeah, it's overwhelmingly positive in terms of the perceptions from students when we've collected them.
Yeah.
Gareth?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, no, that's fine. I have just one question in the chat that pertains to what you were just explaining. Julian asks, did you say you only do this with formative assessments?
Yeah, I've actually personally, for the first time ever last semester, I did it with summative assessments. That was the first time I'd ever tried it. That was interesting because I think there's a difference between formative and summative. To the point about whether the students are likely to come and book in a further meeting with you, I think that is, I found with summative feedback that a lot of my students still wanted that meeting, because I think for me, although I haven't surveyed the students as to why, I have a sense that that's because it was a high stakes mark. And even with that audio feedback, they still wanted a follow-up meeting, see the whites of my eyes and say, look, I've listened to it, because all of them said, I've listened to it, really helpful, really useful, really constructive, much better than some of the other feedback I've got. That's all great. Can I still book in to see you? Because it was 52, and that's freaking me out a little bit, particularly and this was for a final year undergraduate model, first semester of their final year. So they're very anxious, and that is challenge. It's not going to solve those kind of problems. We could talk all day about other challenges around assessment methods, assessment load, anxiety over assessments, and I'm thinking about that all the time at the moment. This won't solve that, but I did find it was interesting because before that point, Kate and I had only done it for formative assessments, and because of that low stakes nature combined with the audio comments, I think we both found we were getting fewer follow-ups, and they could just have that as a piece, and they could play it 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and they would do in the run-up to the summative. So you can track it through analytics on Culture and Media and most recording software and see how many times they played it, for how long, on what dates, and that's quite useful, as opposed to not really knowing, because in Turnitin you can see the eye, can't you, if someone's checked it or not. It's a bit bleak if you check that after you've just given feedback on, say, 100 scripts, and you see only 50 of them have actually got an eye next to them, which means 50 didn't even click it. You don't know whether they've read it or interacted with it. Hopefully that answers that one. But probably there's other slides on this, aren't there, Kate?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up the second point here, talking about it being a more colloquial conversation type feedback, which they were finding helpful, kind of links back into that point where students wanted to hear us saying the feedback. And the next slide there talks about hearing the feedback in my tutor's voice as a conversational style leaves little room for misunderstanding. So again, I think it's reinforcing that personal relationship between you and the student, which brings them to the table emotionally and makes it more a place where students are more receptive to it. I think also going back to that initial point about students want to be able to access it in a different way. The penultimate bullet point, it's more flexible and can be listened to anywhere, feels more personalized. So as Gareth says, it's been really positive feedback. And just when we're doing it in a formative, we often know who we're marking. Obviously, summative, we don't. But one of the little things we used to do, Gareth, was we'd always say the student's name at the beginning of the feedback. And that seemed to make a huge impression that we really cared and we really knew the student. And I would always type that, the same sort of thing. But saying it seemed to make a big difference in the student's perception and reception of it.
Yeah, they just beyond any other thing, an easy win is they just think you've put so much more time, effort, personalization, and I think that's when we were writing the blogs, which we've got links to. In terms of the blog that I wrote, I think we're all interested in this kind of emotional connection, which Kate alluded to, and I do think that's becoming an increasing issue for those working in HE, and the ability or not to create that kind of emotional connection, because there's a lot of the literature to say the more emotionally connected you are to your institution and to your discipline, the better you're likely to perform. And I do think that's, for me, I don't know what anyone else thinks, but interesting at the end to talk a bit about this if there's time. I find that increasingly challenging to achieve. I'm just finding it more and more difficult with some students to kind of break down those barriers. And I do think there's things that can help with that, not such as ice breaking as the first time you teach students and trying to establish yourself and your personality in the way that you want to work with students. But this can help, like hearing the voice and them seeing you and knowing you as a person and kind of learning a bit more about you. Like everyone knows who Kate is in the School of Law because, Kate and because Kate teaches on large modules and because she's engaging and approachable. And I think that's an interesting thing about HE, that one thing as we've probably experienced is that students will navigate to certain members of staff. Now, that's interesting for me, is that one potential downside of doing this kind of stuff is you get a closer engagement with students. I don't see that as a downside personally, but it can lead to more work, more time, more effort to keep thinking, oh, I want to maintain this emotional connection. And that is something I think schools should work better on, the disciplines should work a bit better on. So yeah, I mean, we found this really much less frustrating in terms of like from our perspective, but also reading what the students had to say. It's just, we were a bit nervous, weren't we? I think, Kate, the first time we did it, about the way it sounded. We're both ex-practitioners. We wanted to get it right. We had this kind of code of conduct in our head, thinking, oh my God, a little bit like when lectures were first captured and people were saying, oh, what am I going to say? Am I going to say something and it'd be recorded? Right or wrong, with that's totally gone out the window now. I really don't think about it. I mean, the one thing I do have thought about recently is sound quality. Like if there's some noise outside or if it's really poor on the sound quality and I listen to it back and it's gone quiet and loud, I know Gordon's done this, like you can buy yourself a cheap microphone and I think there is some suggestion in recent literature that students starting to care more about that. When we first started doing it, as I say, we did it on a dictaphone. I feel like we're talking from the Middle Ages here, but we aren't. And it was really poor sound quality, but they didn't care. I think because audio is so much more regular now, and particularly through podcasts and audiobooks, like I think this quality can put people off or make people engage a little bit more. So I think we would say here, one of our tips is potentially get a microphone or hire one through your we have a kind of media team that we can book microphones from if we need to.
I think we've moved on to top tips really there, haven't we, Gareth? Because I think I wanted to mention about when you were saying we were quite nervous about it when we first did it, and we'd kind of re-record because it wasn't completely polished. And actually, you don't need to do that. And we've tried it both ways, where we started to get a bit more relaxed and then asked the students, did you sort of mind that I went back and said, oh, I see that you've made that point, or actually you've expanded on that a bit lower down, so that's really good. And actually it just felt more natural and more conversational, so it doesn't need to be a polished final sort of script. The conversational feedback in that form is actually what seems to be really appealing to students.
Agreed.
So I think we can talk about this briefly, but we might pick this up with the questions and answer session at the end. This is what we were sort of thinking about when we started doing it. Is it scalable? And we're very keen to hear about people who are perhaps doing it on really big modules. Is it feasible? We were doing it initially with quite small modules. Gareth, you have increased your numbers though, haven't you? Protocol within teams is another one. Is it okay for one of the team members to be doing audio feedback and the other team members to be doing written feedback? And that's something that we're very aware of at the moment. And is it kind of a novelty factor? So is it because one module is offering this that it's going down so well? If there were multiple modules all receiving audio feedback at the same time or within quite a short period, is it actually overwhelming and then it loses the benefit because the students are just being bombarded with all this audio feedback? And indeed, are some programs more suited to it than others? So we've kind of alluded to how you might take this forward. So buying a microphone, would you talk to your team? Would you do a small pilot? We were collecting some data, so we'd love to work with you if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. And as I've said, let's pick this up at the end in the Q&A session, because I'm now going to hand over to Gordon, who is in our Biosciences school, who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences and some of his sort of new and taking it forward ideas.
Okay, thank you, Kate and Gareth. Can we have the next slide, or go on a couple of slides? Yep. So thank you for inviting us for this presentation, and picking up where from Kate and Gareth. So I've not been doing this as long as Kate and Gareth. Several years ago, they ran a workshop in the university, one of our learning days. I went along to that and I was inspired to give this a go. Which is what they advised at the time. So I came back and I started doing this, giving the video feedback. I've done this with lots of different ideas. I started immediately at the time doing it with everything, and over a period of time deciding what was good, what was bad, what worked, what didn't work, doing it with small assignments of maybe 500 words. this wasn't time efficient. Where I've settled down and where I think it's really important for students is using draft submissions. So in the School of Biosciences, currently students do a capstone project, which is 30 credits and a literature review. And I've started giving feedback on the draft submissions for these. And I've really focused my feedback efforts for these students on the draft submissions. Mainly because I think they want to improve it, they want to get a good mark in their projects. And also I feel that in a cohort of 250 students, many of them are not going to do this again. So giving a huge amount of feedback on the final version isn't productive for them. So having this draft feedback via the videos is, I find, a very productive method for them. So in both cases for these, the students submit a 4-page draft. And I have a background as a physiologist, so I do like seeing numbers. Talking there, the average for the screencast is around about 12 minutes, 12 to 13 minutes. It's a bit longer for capstone projects, a bit shorter for literature reviews. And I'm using the Kaltura screencast for that. So I provide the students with a draft feedback. They can go away and then they can have a meeting with me afterwards. I may touch on some of these points as I go through, but what I found is using this video feedback from my perspective has been very efficient with the students. So the actual, can we have the next slide, please, Kate? The actual recording of the video and preparing the feedback may take a little bit longer than normal, but then what I find out, it's much more efficient overall. So the students are reading, looking at the feedback, and they are allowed to come for a follow-up meeting afterwards. And when they come to that follow-up meeting, they're really well prepared. They've got distinct questions, and those meetings run really smoothly and tend to be shorter than they were when I was giving written feedback. So I'm using this approach with Kaltura screen capture. One maybe little comment to make around this, I learned the hard way, is with Kaltura, you're able to frame a portion of the screen for your video recording. At one point, I tried doing this, forgot to frame the screen, frame the screen, and on the right-hand side, I had my Google chat open, and messages were popping up all the time. Luckily, they weren't too bad, but they could have been personal messages or messages about other students and queries. So I think really make sure when you're doing this, either close everything down or just frame the area of the screen you're going to use. I think with linking into Julian's question earlier, in terms of preparation for this, you can just about see it at the bottom of the screen here. I maybe highlight it in yellow, so the submission was via Word. If it's via Turnitin, I maybe drop some bubbles on. I'll read through, drop some bubbles on, which are just sort of prompts for me where I want to talk about something or highlight something in yellow. It's just a prompt from where I want to pick up and think about the comments. So I've got a nice essay here, which is about cold water immersion. I was going through the draft and dropping the points on, and then I would send the link to the student and they have a follow-up meeting later on. So have the next slide, please. So I've done a little survey, a little case study with some of the students over the last couple of years, asking their opinion about this video feedback and how they found it and was it useful. So basically asking them 4 questions here. Did they find it useful? Well, I guess the lovely thing here, it's blue, all blue. Yes, they found the video feedback useful, which is a benefit for me. No one heard or no one hated hearing my voice for too long. So it seemed to be hitting the mark there. More or less useful than traditional feedback. So the majority of students were finding it more useful than having the traditional written feedback. So again, it seemed to be hitting the mark of why I wanted to do this and how we were using it. And I think this third question, question 3, did they want to receive personal feedback for the draft submission or final submission, really backs up my approach that the majority of the students were wanting this detailed feedback on their draft and weren't as worried about the final submission. The question 4, I think, links more into the type of thing that Gareth and Kate are doing, offering the students meetings afterwards, after they've submitted the final work. And did the students want to debrief about the final, to discuss the feedback of their final submission after it had been released? So with this, I would give quite a brief feedback for a final submission, having the detailed feedback at the start. And it's very much a mixed vote there on whether they wanted that detailed feedback.
Gordon, quick question. How many students are these? What's the sample of?
This
of
is
these?
probably from about 15 students over a course of 2 years.
Okay.
This is sort of an ongoing one. I get the students every time I've gone through this project. I have 6 to 10 students in each group and ask them to add on every time. I give them the survey once the marks are released to sort of give their opinion.
Thank you.
Yes, so again, for Julian's question there, I would give them detailed written feedback on it, but I don't think it was as much as I gave in the video. So I think with a 12-minute video, I can say a lot, and using the mouse pointer, which I think if Kate goes on to the next slide, using the pointer, I could highlight individual points really clearly, which I don't think I could do as well when I was writing. I could point to axes on graphs. I could point to various structures in the sentences or how they were writing, which I don't think came across as clearly in the written feedback I was given to drafts before. So I think that it becomes useful, as they were saying here. The students liked the way it was communicated, more clearly it was written down, maybe not as overwhelming for them. They can start and stop it and come back, refer to it. And I guess the second comment here, linking it with what I was pointing to on the screen with what I was talking about. So it made the sort of really detailed, useful feedback. I guess it was good to see that most of them found the feedback useful, nothing really wrong with it. Some found it time consuming, but there's also a good point with this as well. Depending on student styles, they could have the transcript, and that will come up in a couple of slides when I talk about how I think we can move this forward. And maybe a couple of little extra things that I could have done, but I think the perceptions I'm getting from students so far, they're finding this very useful. We have the next slide. Now, this is where the devil in the room, depending on our views, practically just about every conversation I have talking about assessment and things like this is this devil of GenAI and what we should be doing about it and how we deal with it. Now, this is something I'm just trialing at the moment, and I'm waiting to get the first results in. So I'll be really keen for anyone who's tried this or thinking about this of whether it works. Can we use GenAI with the students and feedback to close the feedback loop? So can I have the next slide? Now, why is this important? So really, I think regardless of what anyone thinks about GenAI, we have to engage the students with this. We have to teach them how to use it effectively and how to use it properly to get the most of it out. And for this, I'm giving you the example here from the World Economic Forum. Every few years, they publish a list of skills that they think people will be looking for in students when recruiting. On the left-hand side, here's this from 5 years ago. This was a list that came out in 2020 about what employers would want now, as we're talking now. And this is before ChatGPT raised its ugly head. And we can, obviously, this is the type of things we would expect employers to want from students. And on the right is a list that came out in January about where they think things will be in 5 years' time. What skills will they want from students and employing in 2030. And obviously the big new entry at the top, straight in at number 1, is understanding AI and big data. So I think we have a duty as academics to be training students to use AI efficiently. And so this is where I'm trying as a trial at the moment and see how it's going in a small group. Can it be effective with the feedback loop? So can I have the next slide? Now with this, I'm trying the Notebook LM. So this is part of the Google Education suite if people have it. Notebook LM is very useful in the way that you can upload documents to it. And we've had a permission to use this type of Notebook LM for various activities in the university. And this is just an example I took with the student essay from before. So Maddie, the student, gave me permission to use her essay in this way and to show the information. I've taken her draft essay. I've taken the transcript from the video I made. You can also upload the video directly. I've taken the transcript, put it in. I've asked the Notebook LM to generate the key points. What were the key points in my feedback to her? And then I've put her final version in and asked it, has this final version met the feedback? And if I have the next slide, I think coming up, it's sort of putting the final version in. It's giving the information, what you've done well, what you've addressed, what you haven't addressed, where you could maybe improve things a bit more. So hopefully what I'm hoping with students doing this, by using this, I think this is almost like having a good friend read your work. And they can do it much faster than we can. And picking up traits, summarizing information to allow the students to improve their work. I'm not expecting, I don't want them to write their essays with this. I want them to learn from it and take it forward. So this is how hopefully I'm using Notebook LM in the future. And hopefully also thinking about, can we use this type of approach to chart a student's feedback journey? Can they start at level 1, putting their feedback in, and see the improvement over 3 years and how it's changing, how they've improved, how their writing's improved, and how things are changing through their student journey. So I think that's where I'm going to finish. I'd be really keen to see if anyone's tried this or thought about this and any pitfalls with it. And so I will finish there and open to any questions.
Thank you so much. I think you can unshare your screen now, Kate, so we can see each other a bit better. Yeah, as I said before, you're welcome to post your questions in the chat, but you can also raise your hand and ask any questions on camera. Absolutely up to you. So I'm opening the floor for questions. Phil.
I'll jump in. Sure, I'll start while we're on. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. I'll give you my take from where I'm coming from. The thing I'm really interested in is allowing staff to give feedback in the way that is optimal for them. I think we do a lot of things that was optimal for students, which is great and really valuable, and we should do that. But I think we also need to think about making provisions for staff to give feedback in the way that suits them the best, be it Word documents, audio, feedback, whatever. Everyone works differently and everyone's more proficient in different ways. I think you'd said you hadn't actually tested that yet within like one module about people using audio and some people using Word or kind of written documents. Do you have any views / insights on it, whether you think it would be okay? I think my view is that if you have a conversation with students and say, we're working towards optimizing everything for everyone, they'd be okay with it. And your stuff would seem to suggest that audio feedback is just as good as written feedback, if not better in some places. It's just a general, do you have any views, comments on that? Really, I've got nothing better, sorry.
Maybe I think starting with, so the research project literature review I'm doing is for, we currently have about 500 students enrolled in that module. So the majority of people are using written feedback. I'm probably at the extreme, using the audio video feedback. And I don't know whether I'm big enough or stupid enough or old enough that I don't care if someone tells me not to do it. I think it works and I want to try it, and I want to try and get more people involved with it. So
So sorry, just so I Gordon, you're actually using it whilst other colleagues on the same module are doing a different.
Yeah, I'd use everybody else is using, I think majority of other people are using written feedback. Some are
cool.
using audio feedback, so majority using other approaches. We're meant to have this very formulaic things you did well, areas for improvement, but I think the video, you can get that same across in the video feedback.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I agree. I'm always looking for people to support the idea more than anything. Yes, it's an agenda. I get that. But no, it's really interesting to hear that that's actually something you're already doing. And I might come back to you later on that if that's okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Phil. Claire.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you, all of you. That was really, really interesting. And I've got so many questions, so I better limit this. I had tried audio feedback before, but it was very specifically during the project term in the summer. And all the students are international with English as a second language. And so I had tried, well, it was actually video feedback, because at the end of their project, part of the assessment will be a presentation. And with differing language skills, that's quite stressful. They have a Viva as well. So I've been trying to start as early as possible to engage them and help them talk about the subject they've chosen and help with basic pronunciation, because quite often they haven't had somebody who can give them that feedback. And so very early on, I'd asked them to prepare, I don't know, it was 3 slides or 5 slides. Show me some PowerPoint slides, show me what your project is, why it's interesting, blah, blah, blah. And then I gave, and what I did, because it was kind of independent, I went on Zoom, played their slides to them, and kind of talked through it, made suggestions, but I'd also duplicated their slides and perhaps given them a couple of pointers. So I was trying to do a kind of audio and visual, but I didn't collect feedback and I didn't really know how to collect feedback. So, I mean, that's one of the barriers for me, that all along I try and provide, whether it's written or audio, I try and provide details that I think are important, like academic basics, and then how does your communication actually, and your academic level, how does that sound? And I don't know if anybody, you talked about feedback literacy and you talked about feedback engagement, and I very much feel like I am shouting into a void, or helpfulling into a void. So it's really interesting to see what positivity you've had back from that, and it's made me think maybe I could start to provide audio feedback. Yeah, maybe for, like you said, as you started, maybe lower stakes. Yeah, sorry for the rant. But any thoughts from anyone?
I was just going to say, I think we would really encourage that, Claire. I think, yeah, you raised some interesting points about wider issues about assessment and feedback. I do think there's a lack. Well, certainly I can only speak to our institution, but I think in our discipline there has been this kind of uniformity or formalization of the way in which we're all supposed to do feedback. And for me, that the problem with that is that can stifle creativity or stifle different methods. And this did come up in our last internal education conference, and the faculty director of education said, no, I don't want to stifle creativity. You should be able to give feedback in different formats within modules. and still achieve what you want to do with feedback or feed forward. So I would love to have more conversations on learning and teaching at all within our school, but particularly in relation to the way in which feedback is being provided, assessment points, assessment load, speaking with students about what they understand feedback to be, their preconceptions and assumptions, particularly if they're transitioning from school and college, what they've received in the past, what are they receiving now, how they can use it, whether they do use it. And I find myself, though, when I do meet with follow-up meetings with students, I find myself trying to focus much more on that kind of stuff. And that I was just thinking about this, like Kate and I have both done this quite a bit, and I think, I don't know if Kate's the same as me, but because the audio is there, I focus less on rereading now and repeating. I'm like, play that again if you want to for my main points. Let's focus a little bit about, feedback literacy or assessment literacy, and like, let's have a look at how you're going to use this again. Where have you got feedback on other modules? What's happening there? Have you taken any steps for speaking to those tutors, almost pushing back a little bit? Because again, I'm getting a little bit frustrated at the moment that students are gravitating to me more and more to ask me questions about feedback across their degrees from all sorts of different members of staff about all sorts of different stuff. And it's nice that they're opening up because there is that closer connection, but also I don't think this is recognised within HE that takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not equal across all members of staff by any means. You will get that gravitation, and similarly you might get members of staff kind of not encouraging that and saying it's there now, off you go and sort it out however you want to. So no, I agree with you. So, but I definitely agree giving it a go.
Can I ask the three of you technically, so as part of the kind of formative information that you give the students, do you give marking rubric, marking criteria, the mark sheet, so they know exactly what will be expected? Okay, and then when you're giving your feedback, do you use the key points from that to pick out? Because I can't remember who it was said, you highlight the Word document and you go into the points. And I don't know, is that as if you were doing in-text comments for a kind of big dissertation and talking about what they'd said and how they'd said it? Or is it that kind of overview that you would give on a more generalized marking sheet according to the broad criteria that we would like to examine in the summative?
Think with this, so I think this is one of the key comments I got from the students. They'd like me to link it to the rubric more.
Okay.
And I haven't been deliberately working with their rubric. I've been maybe looking at points I think they can improve.
Okay.
And when I've dropped comments on, it's mainly been for my memory.
Okay.
So like I've read through this 4 pages of document or 1,000 words. That bit, I need to come back and look at that again. It's reminding me to stop there and particularly pick up that point again.
Okay.
So that's
Because
really for my benefit.
Okay. Just because we did this, we've been trying to develop this for the last couple of years, but at a master's level with international students, we found that we haven't been able to develop understanding of criticality. And so I like to call it forced criticality. You know, tell us a question. You know, we're exploring this subject. It's food security, it's food production. Tell us a question. Give us a short summary of one side with evidence. Give us a short summary of another side with evidence. Now tell us your conclusion based on the evidence. And I did both for that. I did little in-text comments about, you know, accuracy or just questioning, oh, why did you choose that resource when it's in 2014 and I asked you for current, yeah. And then we also did the sheet with the kind of marking criteria, just so they had a detailed breakdown of basics. So here are the primary subject related criteria, and here are some kind of secondary academic background criteria. And I just wondered how everybody else did it. Do you do in text? Do you do just on the marking sheet? Again, it depends on numbers in your classes. I've talked you into submission.
I don't know if one of the speakers want to reply to this, or Kate.
Yeah. Sorry, so a mix really.
Okay. Depending on the
yeah.
assessment. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we
I
had,
think that's right.
yeah. This is
So,
mixing.
sorry.
Yeah. We had a question from Maxine. I think Gareth, you came in and answered it here, but maybe Maxine, if you want to come on.
Oh yeah,
ask
it was a question about whether it was interesting from the perspective of external examiner. I'm also an external examiner looking out for this. I've not seen much of it yet, but it's interesting to see it's coming in, and I think it is happening more than it used to. I think the 3 minutes on grade mark is a rush. I've used it in the past, and I think you are rushed for time, and I think that's part of the reason that stuff might be missed out. Also, you can get a bit carried away without you having that kind of structure in your head. That feedback sandwich is a minimum, I think, which is what Gordon was alluding to, and I think Kate uses as well, like kind of starting with a positive, if it's formative, saying their name. If it's a mark they're not happy with, like saying you might be disappointed, but let's have a look at what you did well first of all, and kind of imagining them in front of you delivering that as useful. But then you can kind of move forward into the constructive feed forward stuff, and maybe the stuff they did less well, and most crucially performative, obviously, where they might go next, and whether that, you know, sometimes I might even say if it's a really poor mark, I sometimes may even prompt them, say, look, if you want to talk to me more about this, then you obviously can do, because the interesting thing about law students is they're saying to me increasingly that they feel they failed if they've got below a 60. Right, when you know, me reminding them that 40 is the pass mark for undergraduate, but for them it's like 60. Anything below a 2-1 is a fail. If they get that on a formative and they get a mark of say 52 to 56, they will be straight away just thinking, oh my god, what I've completely failed, and then everything that comes. So I think I'm increasingly conscious, if I've given a mark like that audio massively assists in kind of empathizing and I say sometimes a bit of performance. You sometimes have to put a bit of energy into that, but I think it's important, right? Because I think that could be missed in written, particularly where you're marking 100 scripts. You're just like, I've got to get these all done, and then you forget. You know, just think 52, 50, you know, these are just marks. These are not human beings in front of you. Just thinking about getting the scripts done.
Thank you.
I was just
helpful. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm just mindful of the time, and I was just going to pick up, I think Julian's put a comment in the chat about some graders don't like showing their webcam, privacy concerns. Yeah, I can completely see where you're coming from. And when we started doing it, Gareth and I kind of split, and you went with the webcam and I didn't, because we were just interested to see the students' perception of that. That's probably what, 10, 12 years ago, Gareth. At the time, they weren't really bothered. They didn't care whether you had a little webcam or not. I wonder if that might have changed a bit, and they might be keener to see a webcam now. But I think if even if you had a picture of you so the students can see what you look like, particularly if they're ones bringing in the last point from Phil, particularly if they're ones that you don't actually know very well, perhaps at least a picture of you to put a face to the voice would help. And yeah, I think I would still do it with people I don't know very well. So yes, some of the groups I was doing it with, I did know very well, but not all of them. And I just think you're trying to get that connection there. And this is a nice way to start it.
Thank you. I think that was impressive, Kate. You just answered 3 questions from the chat in one answer. Like, yeah, I can see how audio feedback is really going well at your institution. That was fantastic. So I think just I'm conscious of time, and I would like just to thank you for your talk, for sharing your insights on audio feedback. I have many ideas scribbled down because thinking about next academic year, because this one is over now, next academic year, what can we implement, and really in regards to being more efficient with feedback as well, because it is taking a lot of time. And what you said as well, Gareth, at the beginning, and the other ones chimed in, is it's interesting where you use something that is more time efficient for you, like an audio feedback once you get a hang of it. And it's also perceived by the students as personal and good feedback, right? It's like, it's the dream scenario. So I think, yeah, so this was really insightful. Thank you so much. For joining us today. As always, we will have the recording, the lecture slides, and any other resources on our TILE website. And hope to see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Bye.